use a satin clear glaze for my pottery and my sculpture. So the neat thing is that all the color, all the decoration is in the slip layer, and everything is everything's pretty much done when it comes out of the bisque kiln. So what I've done is develop a satin clear glaze, which for earthenware, even though I'm firing to cone 1, we actually made this glaze for cone 04 as well. There was a ceramic engineer that I met at a workshop, Carla Wagner. She works in industry in Texas, and she actually took one of my workshops at Aramont, and the wonderful thing was we became friends. So she offered to help me with any kind of technical difficulties I might be having. And I knew enough glaze chemistry to get myself into a lot of trouble. I would do a couple hundred glaze tests and get nowhere. The problem with getting a satin clear glaze at earthenware temperatures is that the very thing that makes it satin also makes it opaque. And so there's a reason why a lot of earthenware glazes are shiny, super shiny. And I used a shiny glaze for years, and it was really the only thing I didn't love about that work, because it gave such a reflection that it kind of said, stay a little over there, and I want people to pick this stuff up and handle it and use it. As far as the sculpture goes, I want it to look like a skin rather than, something highly reflective. And so I really just didn't have quite enough knowledge to get to the point where I had a satin clear that was consistent. And so Carla came and she worked with me, and we developed this satin clear glaze that we're going to use now. The thing about working with an engineer is they really know what they're doing. And as far as the tools that are used in industry versus the tools that are used in potter studios are different. And there's no reason why we can't have some more overlap than we currently have. One of the things that Carla introduced me to is a density cup. This little thing, it holds exactly 100 cc's of fluid, and it weighs 200 grams. It measures density to whatever your scale will measure. In this case, we're using an old butcher scale, which measures out to 100th of a decimal place. I have an OHAS scale at home, which does the same thing. She also, that was another Carla addition, was to get me to use a digital scale instead of a triple beam scale. The triple beam scale works perfectly well. It just takes a lot longer to wait for that scale to, balance out. So all you have to do is mix. In order to get consistent results from your kiln, if you can measure density, you've reduced one very important variable. Some glazes are more forgiving than others. So, potters are typically, they'll put their hand in and they'll watch it slake off and just say, they can see their skin or they can't see their skin, whatever their measurement is visually, they can visually kind of calibrate how thick or thin their glaze should be. What I've learned through working with an engineer is that it's not about thickness, it's about density. A glaze can appear quite thick, depending on what's in it, and not be very dense, and vice versa. So the cool thing is that I now have this density cup, which is used in industry, and you can too. So what you do is make sure your glaze is well stirred. Fill your density cup past that meniscus point. Put your lid on, and the excess is going to come out. See how I just made that little fountain? Perfect amount. Exactly 100 cc's, no more, no less. Once you've got the excess wiped off, you put it on your digital scale. So my reading is 356. The cup weighs 200. Water, 100 cc's of water weighs 100 grams. And so the extra, the overage, so 1.0 density is water. So anything over that is what the density of the glaze is. So I'm going for 1.44, and right now I have 1.56. So all I have to do is dump it out, wash it out, dry it out, because you want to use every little bit of the capacity. Add some water. That's the extra glaze. And it's a educated guess how much is enough water. You might be saying to yourself, I don't need that much accuracy, and you might not based on your glazes. But for the production potter who's got dinnerware going, and it's a blue glaze, density matters. Like the shade of blue you're going to get is going to be somewhat dependent on the density. So you've been making this dinnerware, say, for a couple years, and all of a sudden somebody calls you and says, oh shoot, you know, I broke a plate. Can you remake me that plate? And so you're like, no problem. Well, if you didn't measure your density, it's going to come out likely a different shade than the rest of her set. Some people don't care, but if you do, then maybe this tool will help assist you. So once again, and now it should be closer to 344, 1.44 density, and we nailed it. So now it's good to go. And so it was only through trial and error that I realized that 1.44 was the optimal density for my glaze. If my glaze is more dense, aka thicker, then it gets shiny. You know, it's too much material. And if it's too thin, if it gets to be more like a wash, then it doesn't really have enough material to give it that magical satiny crystalline surface. Your glaze, when you're not, you know, if you're not using this Naples Wagner satin clear, you just have to play around with it. You know, from your hand dipping or whatever way you're measuring what's like, okay, the glaze is good to go, measure the density, throw the kiln in, get the kiln out and say, I nailed it, I love the glaze just like that. Well, you recorded the density, so now you know what your measurement is. You get the kiln out and it's like, it got washy, the color looks washy. Well, it wasn't dense enough. Now you can test, you can actually, you know, just run a test kiln with varying degrees of density and see which one you like the best. And then put it on a whole body of work, a whole kiln load of work, and then you really get a bigger picture. You know, just doing tests is great to start, but then you have to apply it to a larger expanse of work to really get to see the potential of it. Because my glaze does settle, got some frit in it, which likes to settle out. I stir it before I dip things, make sure all my particles are in suspension. And I'll take a pot like this, hold it from its foot, dip it right up into the foot and out. The consistency of your application is important. If I put it in and held it there for a few seconds, it would be absorbing more material. So you can measure your density, and that's helpful, but you could also say if your application processes are consistent, then your results will be consistent. If one day you're dipping, another day you're pouring, or some objects you pour and some objects you dip, you'll just have to sort of play around with that and learn what the optimal kind of approach is for your work. For me, there are some things that I can't dip, that I have to pour. And so in my case, when I'm pouring those things, it's not just like done, it's like slow pour so that it has enough time to accumulate enough material. And so then to get the interior of this, just use a measuring cup, any kind of little pitcher pour. Just do that. I turned it as I poured it out so that it would coat the whole rim. And that worked pretty well. There's one patch in here that's bare clay, so I'll just take a brush, grab some glaze, and you know, this is just clear glaze over raw clay. So, you know, if it's a little thicker or thinner, it don't really matter. And then of course we need to do, I am more trying to get a consistent application than worrying about whether I get it on the foot or not. Because I can take my sponge and just wipe that off. I bothered leaving a nice terracotta foot, so I'm going to take the glaze off of it so that it can show. And the little places where my fingerprints are, dab it with a bit of glaze. And that pot is ready to go in the kiln. As far as, you know, that there was a small opening that the handle left. Sometimes that opening is larger. in which case the handle will fill up with glaze, and then when you go to dump it, it all comes gushing out there, which can leave an interesting mark. You know, it's just a thicker place, so the glaze goes from satin to a little line of clear and then satin, which I don't really mind, but if you wanted to keep that from happening, I would just take, you know, the sponge, you could just snap a piece off, you know, like that, and then shove it into that crack with a needle tool. Just plug it, and then glaze, and then unplug it and dab a little glaze there to fill in what you resisted. So that's it.